conflict solving, the script for the podcast. Conflict. Conflict is a dispute between at least two people or groups of people resulting from the need to share limited resources, work or occupying different positions but having different objectives or values. In the course of a dispute, team members or a whole department of the firm are trying to ensure that their point of view would prevail comparing with others' opinion. During the public consultation, a conflict occurs as a result of the diverse interests of the parties taking part in the consultation. The probability of the conflict occurrence is relatively high, therefore you should prepare yourself for it diligently. A conflict can be overcome in a number of different ways, depending on the circumstances of the dispute, personality, and state of mind of the estranged parties, the existing relations between the two, so how they cooperated and coexisted before, and the decisions and actions of all concerned. To master or find a constructive solution, it is important to determine the root causes of the conflict. 1. Whether it is a matter of a personal nature. 2. Whether it is a subjective reason. 3. Or whether a substantive problems have occurred, like miscommunication or misunderstanding. The most difficult conflicts to resolve are the ones in the system of power and dependency, for example in the vertical relationships between superiors and subordinates. The difficulties stem from the fact that in general, the actual causes of the conflict are deeply hidden. The circumstances compel others to opt for one party. It is hard to be an outsider even when taking a passive attitude, for example, in the fear to fall into disfavor just simply by calculation. While mutually blaming each other, it is difficult to determine the degree of responsibility, blame, of each party. The view of a conflict in business has changed over the years. According to traditional view, conflict can be avoided. The reasons of a conflict is a management errors in the building and running an organization, errors by instigators of pro-people. The conflict is tearing and destroying the organization and undermining optimal productivity. The task of leadership is to eliminate conflict. The optimal productivity of the organization requires to eliminate conflict. But according to modern view, conflict is inevitable. Conflict arises for many reasons, including organizational structure, the inevitable differences in objectives, values, perceptions of specialist staff, etc. The conflict can contribute to the organization's effectiveness or harms. The task of leadership is to manage the conflict and to deal with it in a conducive manner to maximize an optimal efficiency or optimal productivity. The business optimal efficiency can be achieved with a conflict run at moderate level. Now, please consider which description of the conflict is closer to your perception. People react differently in a conflict situations. Some would try to avoid a conflict or would try to adapt to it, while others would take rivalry. And some would look to find a common compromise, expressing readiness to make concessions, but also searching for opportunities to achieve their own goals and ambitions. However, the most preferred approach in a conflict situations is to seek cooperation. This approach can achieve the objectives of both parties. Let's take a moment and look at the most characteristic ways, styles, of dealing with a conflict. 1. Avoidance. This style involves avoiding to deal with a conflict or denying that a conflict exists. The conflict is then hidden and no party has any chance to meet their own needs. By adopting this style, we abandon our own goals and denying our partner the opportunity to achieve his objectives too. This style is preferred by people who do not tolerate any emotional tensions and that have failed previous attempts to use different styles to deal with a conflict. This style is used when when the target is not important person or is partially important, when there is no chance of achieving own goals, needs, when the projected loss from dealing with conflict outweighs the benefits of resolving it, that is, when efforts outweigh benefits from resolving a conflict. When you need to give yourself and a partner time to rethink an issue and to reduce the emotional tensions it causes. When you need a time to gather all pros and cons to make an informed decision. When others can more effectively deal with, resolve a conflict. 2. Rivalry or competition, confrontation. It is an expression of very strong desire to defend their own interests and lack of interest in the other's party needs. Disregard of the interest of the others is a characteristic for rivalry. It is a way of managing a conflict in which there is always one winner and one loser. The stronger party always wins, using different tactics, for example, a physical violence or a subtle manipulation. This style is used when an immediate and decisive action is required, for example, in crisis, critical situation when a decision is needed. When an important but unpopular procedure must be implemented, for example, to tighten discipline. When we are right, but it is more important for the other party to force their way. When we need to defend ourselves from people that benefit from the situation when conflict is kept unresolved, people presenting rivalry behavior. For example, someone deliberately does not want to resolve the conflict as is benefiting from such situation. When we need to protect ourselves from incompetent people. 3. Adaptation. This style manifests by the resignation from achieving own needs and the equally strong desire to meet the needs of the other party. This style is used when the other party is perceived as a stronger one, or when the one party uses such tactic, that is, resignation from own needs, in expectation that the other party will return a favor in the future, when it would be more important for the first party. This style is used when you realize that you are on the wrong side and you allow the other party to make a right decision. When it is more important for the other party to win, and by allowing it, your aim is to maintain a good relationships with each other. When it is more important for you to gain trust from the other party than the result of settling of the conflict. When it is important to maintain peace between both parties and to avoid any adverse publicity. When it is important that others learn from their mistakes. 4. Compromise. This style allows for a partial satisfaction for both parties, where both parties can partially reach their goals, meet their interest needs. Everyone gains and loses some of their goals. In this case, partial interests of both parties are taken into account. This style is used when our needs are not very important and are not worth efforts to defend them. When both parties are equally strong and both have conflicting goals. When a temporary agreement is sufficient. When there is a time pressure and an immediate resolution is required. When the other styles, as rivalry and cooperation, fail. 5. Cooperation. It is the result of very strong desire to defend own interest and the equally strong desire to meet the other party goals. The conflict is treated as a common goal for both parties to resolve. This style is used when it is important to find a common solution and a compromise would not deliver that. When the solution concerns all team and opinions of people and their different perspectives and views need to be considered. When the objective is to reach agreement by integrating different views. When the aim is to overcome feelings of hostility to allow for a good team relationships. When the goal is to learn objectivity by trying to understand the other's point of view. the role of the moderator and the roles of participants in the public consultation. When we talk about public consultations, the conflicts topic comes back like a boomerang. The process during which authority representatives present their plans to the citizens, which indirectly or directly affect them, is a platform for many conflicts and issues. Such conflicts are almost inevitable. They were in the past and they will reappear again. It is important to learn from it and strengthen own competencies that allow to diagnose and discover the conflicts early and use the energy that is generated when they appear. We have already talked about traditional and contemporary's view of the conflict. It is also worth to mention the benefits that they bring. Yes, benefits. These are motivational increase, emerging innovating solutions. Both parties are forced to define their own views, and parties that are in opposition are required to verbalize their fears and anxieties. The role of the third parties can also be different. They can play different roles depending on the form of their participation and opportunities they can get involved. However, they should demonstrate such competence as active listening, observation, help in understanding and defining the problem that concerns the parties in the conflict, understanding the feelings of the parties in the conflict and acceptance for expressing them, help to both parties in the conflict to analyze the problem, encouragement to both parties in the conflict to seek alternative solutions, ensuring that both parties worked out mutually agreed ways to resolve the conflict and providing advice and assistance when required. In conclusion, remember not to conceal conflicts. A conflict that is kept hidden may cause more harm than an open and declared conflict that is somehow managed. Knowing the ideas, fears, expectations and proposals of the other party, it is easier to take action and resolve the issue, at least partially, to our satisfaction. Communication skills training. Communication skills are very important in the pursuit of a constructive solution to the conflict. Those who try to use their communication skills when facing a conflict can positively resolve it. What to look out for? Firstly, whether we strive to achieve the joint aim together or whether we are trying to encourage the other party to choose our solution that is seen as the only right one. Secondly, how we listen to our interlocutor, whether we want to understand him, her, or whether our listening is to reject what the other party wants to say. Thirdly, as the first 2 points, our willingness to change our own position or opinion is also very important. There are people for whom any change of their opinion is simply unacceptable, and they will defend it to the bitter end. Fourthly, the more people involved in a conflict, the more it is important that all would participate in the discussion. There is a high risk that the debate will be dominated by the leaders, formal and informal. Therefore, the role of the moderator is extremely important here. Another point to consider is finding inspiration in the disagreement. A different look at the problem may inspire us to new ideas and into taking account of factors not previously considered. And lastly, the interaction, contact with another person, and the desire to come to an agreement is very important. A conflict will stay inside both parties if they were engaged into it. Even if they were to be separated for some time, they still would be affected. Parties to the conflict which do not talk and are not trying to come to joint conclusion would not give themselves a chance to resolve it quickly and with satisfaction. Let's try to compare the behaviors that can help facilitate communication to resolve a conflict or those that make it more difficult to find a solution. Along the behaviors that help to resolve conflicts, we can find joint search for ideas, listening in order to understand other party, willingness to change position or opinion. All team members participate in the discussion, finding inspiration in a disagreement, interactions and coming to an agreement. Along the behaviors hindering the resolution of conflicts, there are convincing to an agreed opinion, listening in order to reject someone's opinion or not listening at all, defending own opinion till the bitter end, a discussion dominated by a few members, negative reactions to differences in the opinions, convincing to an agreed opinion by interacting with a different individual separately. Things to remember when confronted during a meeting with different opinions are raised. 1. To keep the discussion under control to avoid escalation of the conflict as a result of the parties' behavior. 2. To make sure both parties are absolutely honest and do not settle on a general and not precise judgments and opinions. 3. To control yourself, own emotions and preferences. 4. It is also important to record all agreements, independently or with somebody's help. Every conflict resolved in a constructive manner meets the following aims: motivational, innovational, identificational, and informational. Motivational aim of a conflict refers to the fact when a conflict is forcing an activity to improve the reality, to look critically at ourselves and organizational behavior. Talking about the innovational aim, it is worth noting that the conflict raises the need for change, the search for new innovative solutions. A third important aim of a conflict is identificational. Conflict allows people to get to know each other, to learn their strengths and weaknesses, and to integrate around the required objectives. And lastly, a conflict has another important aim, informational. During the conflict, we can find out what is happening in the team, department, or in a particular group. Third-party involvement in a conflict. Third-party involvement in a conflict may be sometimes necessary and beneficial in order to resolve it. It usually takes 5 different forms. 1. Facilitation. When a third party is involved in the discussions and adopts cooperating procedures for stimulating the conversation. 2. Mediation. Requires a participation of an unbiased person who is to assist the parties in finding acceptable solutions for both parties. Mediator helps in the process of seeking proposals. 3. Arbitration. Is a process where both parties appeal for a solution to an independent expert. The proposals presented by the expert are not legally binding, and the final agreement is dependent on the willingness of both parties to accept it. 4. The court. It is an attempt to resolve a dispute in a legal institution. This involves entering the path of legal proceedings. 5. Admonition. This is a situation where, as a result of the impasse and the inability to resolve the dispute by both parties, dissatisfaction is expressed by the representative of the parent authority. This actively should be applied very carefully in order to avoid accusations of taking one or the other side. Conflict resolution. If a conflict cannot be avoided, is it worth to know how to deal with it when it occurs? This is a question that is worth to answer earlier than later. There are different ways of resolving a conflict. There are some people in a conflict situations that do not take any action. Such attitude is not conducive to resolve a conflict, while it accumulates plenty of negative emotions. Quite popular is also playing for time to delay a decision. Playing for time is not a solution either, as it is not allowing to resolve a conflict. It only holds the state of implementation of the project around which there is a debate. Another method which we can see is to take an action that is not apparent. Activities that have no influence to resolve the conflict and maintain the status quo. This strategy is taken by those who want to create a positive self-image and at the same time want to stop the realization of the action to resolve a conflict. It is also quite common to look for a scapegoat, individuals, groups of people on which the responsibility for the failure can be placed or shifted. Of course, all strategies listed above are quite ineffective. These strategies would not lead us to resolution of a conflict. In order to identify the characteristics of the constructive way of resolving a conflict, we should look at 6 principal steps. 1. Identification of a problem. That is, finding a clear definition of the problem. What is the reason for the conflict? What are the differences between the parties? Where are the common points to help solution? 2. Finding a reason for a conflict. It is very important to identify a reason of a conflict, which would allow to define a situation itself, and in the future such situation can be avoided. 3. Creating solutions, a research stage. As we have already said, looking for a common solution with a full of commitment for both parties to resolve the problem. 4. Assessment, evaluation of a conflict, and a resolution selection. 5. Solutions implementation. 6. Assessment, evaluation of practical effectiveness of a solution. By refining the goals and operation standards, we are creating a clear and commonly accepted way to search for solutions. The structures makes us feel relatively safe, facilitating the participation and involvement of all stakeholders. In general, all activities that allow more effective communication between both parties are seen as beneficial. It is worth remembering that the firm can change the perception of the conflict. Firstly, by influencing the attitudes towards a conflict that brings to a conducive agreement. A common mistake that we can observe is to introduce assessment of the situation through the following lens: winner-loser. Constructive conflict resolution requires avoiding to provoke an emergence of situations win-lose. Secondly, you can change the perception of the conflict by reinforcing behaviors that are conducive to make an agreement. Hence the importance of a direct relations between both parties, as they provide an opportunity for learning about each other, mutual understanding, and allow for a specific behavior to occur. Conversation between both parties is the perfect example. By building a positive relationship with each other, by looking at the problem from the other party's perspective and listening to the other side, these are the examples illustrating the behavior to support constructive resolution of a problem. Of course, there can be much more behaviors that can help resolution. They can quite often appear completely unrelated to the purpose which the parties want to achieve. Lastly, one more element must be emphasized or stressed that positively changes the perception of the way a conflict is seen by both sides. Of course, there are different tactics that are aimed at changing the behavior of participants in a conflict situation. Actually, they are concentrated on the actions very much focused on changing somebody's behavior, and activities focused on fully changing somebody's attitudes. These are, inter alia, a physical separation of both parties of a conflict via bureaucratic methods, rules, regulations, limitation of the interactions, mediations, confrontations or negotiations, or external consultants, observer, could be used. Special situation called bullying, mobbing. In every company there are conflicts and tensions between individual employees. They take a different form and has its own characteristics, as well are associated with lower or higher costs. A company is a place where conflicts arise at various levels, from a distribution of wealth and resources through a limited possibilities of achieving someone's aspirations and goals, which are, for example, being in power or autonomy. They may arise as a result of disloyalty of an individual employee to the team, disregard to the commonly accepted and agreed rules, or unfair competition. However, it is worth noting that the differences in the professional level rarely lead to the initiation of a bullying behavior. Quite often, the cause is due to something which cannot be officially admitted. Mobbing is a special type of conflict, the term to which the Polish labor law was introduced in 2004 to describe a phenomena that was not named but has always existed. The definition in the code highlighted the important elements of mobbing, a persistent and long-term nature of the behaviors which characterize bullying. The legislator quite clearly and in a precise manner determines how to understand bullying, pointing to the activities involving the harassment or intimidation of an employee, causing him to have a low self-esteem, aiming at humiliating or ridiculing an employee, isolating him, or elimination from the team. Looking from the manager's point of view, we should always look for hidden conflicts, determining the specific behavior of a group of people belonging to it. It is worth to note here that any group of people in a workplace is governed by unwritten rules. Failure to follow these rules will eliminate an individual from the group. At most, the group will start to isolate the person who does not integrate with the team. It should be emphasized that the conflicts in the workplace have very often a hidden nature. They remain outside the knowledge of a manager. Actions and behaviors taken by the parties take a more refined form. This is due, firstly, because of a greater life experience of people in the group, which to compare a children would not have, whose conflicts are usually very open and transparent to the public. Another, perhaps more important, factor which determines the hidden nature of the conflict in the workplace are costs that worker may suffer as a result of his behavior. As a result, a hidden conflict becomes the beginning of a bullying. It is also very important to locate a conflict that is motivated interpersonally, in which specific individuals are involved. These are seen as unsolvable conflicts. However, they can be resolved by the involvement of the outside party. In many cases, it is rather incorrect reading of the messages, their incorrect interpretation and a lack of workable and known solution to resolve such conflicts that means that over the time they grow significantly. Parties to the conflict would then cease to objectively assess both their own arguments and needs as well as those presented by the other party. When attempting to resolve a conflict, the essential is an attempt to diagnose a conflict's process, the elements that impact during the formation of a conflict, and both parties that take part in it. If a conflict is associated with bullying, it is worth to take an advantage of the layman's typology to determine the stage of a dispute and the consequences faced by the victim. The more advanced the situation of conflict, the more advanced the process of psychological harassment, the higher are the costs to be paid by the company and their managers. Unfortunately, the problem of bullying is often ignored by managers or the firm's owners. Such attitude is not only unethical, but it is also very harmful to the entire organization, and all will feel the consequences of the bullying. The consequences are felt by the suffering mobbed person, company and the team that tolerates such a situation. As a result, the quality is affected. Quantity of the work performed is also significantly reduced. The willingness to seek the new and innovative solutions is completely stopped, and the cooperation and collaboration will disappear shortly. Mobbed person would normally try to escape by taking a sick leave without finishing their given tasks, and if she or he will depart, the company would be involved in an additional recruitment process and the adaptation process of a new employee. The consequences of bullying also include the processes for damages and/or compensation brought by an employee that been mobbed at workplace. Under the current law, the responsibility for bullying falls precisely on the employer, irrespective of who was the victim and who was mobber.